Joining me today is Rachael Schmidt, author of Common Sixth Sense: Unleash Your Most Authentic Connected Life. Drawing on her personal experiences, including a serious medical diagnosis and a home invasion, Rachael Schmidt shows us how breath, awareness, and intuition can restore calm in crises. She introduces her theory of volatility, a framework explaining how energy management determines whether life feels chaotic or calm. She teaches readers to transform life's jolts into growth. She argues these practices are urgently needed in a modern connection crisis where people rely too heavily on external validation. Ultimately, she calls for reclaiming one's inner compass, proposing that personal alignment can spark a broader cultural shift toward authenticity, connection, and collective well being. Rachael Schmidt is a mindful-based self-development coach, mentor, and educator who has worked with Fortune 500 leaders and is the founder of the consultancy Common Six. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Rachael.
Thank you for having me, Kathryn.
Okay, I guess the key word here is, and I'm going to pick out the key words that I read in the intro. Okay, theory of volatility. What are we talking about? You're introducing us to the theory of volatility. What is it and what does it mean to us?
Okay, well, let's go back to high school physics for a minute. Let's go back to Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein really understood energy and that the energy of one thing impacts the energy of all things. So if we think about energy in our own lives, I follow that same equation, E equals mc squared, to help us determine how volatile are we when we are impacted by energy. So if we think about energy coming in, that can be from our own thoughts, the messages our body sends us. That can be from any external resource like other people, technology, the environments we expose ourselves to. We are impacted by the energy of all of those things. So E is energy. When we get to the M, we think about my management or my mismanagement of that energy equals C squared. Okay, so think about this. C squared, chaos or calm. So very simply put, energy that I am affected by, my ability to manage that energy or my lack of ability when I mismanage that energy, that equals my chaos or my calm in my life. So we really can be very reflective here when we think about how volatile are we. Are we able to healthily navigate energy as it impacts us daily,
I'm going
hourly?
to stop you there because I don't think we're doing a very good job of it. I mean, most people that I would say a lot of people, whether it's family or friends or work, it's all about this kind of like everything's chaotic or I feel chaotic or who wakes up and goes to work and says, "Oh, I feel so calm." All that I'm feeling really great. How many people? Not too many, I think, on a daily basis. Am I right? And I don't think we are not good doing a good job of managing that energy. So can we give us some examples, like just everyday examples of like we wake up in the morning and we think about all the stuff we have to do and get the kids off to school and, make sure the house is in order before we leave. That's all chaos.
Well, we have to remember, Kathryn, that these decisions to invite calm into our life are conscious decisions. Okay, so we can wake up and subject ourselves to the environments that you just described, or we can make a conscious decision to check with our energy and set an intention for the day, set a micro action goal for the day, so that we can start turning the tables on this. You are absolutely right. This is why I'm so passionate about empowering people to reconnect with themselves because what we are doing is not working. We have more resources than we've ever had, yet people still feel, as you've described, this chaotic disconnection.
Yeah, as you say, we have more resources than we've ever had, but we're not utilizing them. That's what you're saying. We're not doing it right. We're not managing that energy so that we can create that kind of calm. Let's just take that scenario I gave you. You know, waking up in the morning and having all of these things ahead of you for the day and stuff you have to do in the immediacy of your environment, what do we actually do? How do we manage that energy so that we feel calmer, not chaotic?
Well, we have to reclaim the relationship with ourself. So we have to become aware of how much outsourcing we are doing, how dependent we are on other people, environments, technology, circumstances. So that awareness, so just stay with me for a minute. Once we have the awareness, we have the self-awareness. And when we have the self-awareness, we can implement the change through conscious, purposeful action. Okay, so simply put, we've got to become self-aware. We've got to be better at managing the energy. And when we do that, we have aligned decision making. So, from a very simplistic perspective, we wake up and we create a shift that we did not create the day before. That could be in the way that we intend to navigate our day. That can be in a micro action. For example, I'm stressed out at work. I'm going to go for a 3-minute walk. I'm going to sit here with my eyes closed for 30 seconds. They are in the micro action behaviors. What happens to a lot of people is they get just overwhelmed. They have analysis paralysis because they want to make these massive life shifts. And really, the success comes from our energetic micro actions that we make throughout the day. So I'm big on these micro actions because I've seen in the people that I've worked with that they really do have the largest impact. But we have got to get back to our innate abilities that we came with. They are so underutilized. And when we reconnect with these innate abilities, it is not difficult. It is organic. It is natural. It is so much easier to make the shifts that you're talking about.
Yeah, I like the fact that you're talking about sort of these micro, what did you say, the micro management that we can do, because I think that's a real issue. We do think that we have to do these we have to have overwhelming changes, right? And that we can't possibly do that. It's too much. So we kind of back off and we don't do anything, right? But if we can do it, as you say, micromanaging shifts in our behavior, that's what works, right? Uh, yeah.
Micro actions. And if you think about in the book, I describe your common sixth sense tools, which, if you think about the toolbox that you came with your breath, you came with intuition, you came with awareness, which, as I mentioned, leads to self-awareness. You came with the ability to manage energy. How many of these tools are you actually using? If you have something that is a remarkable resource in your life that can bring you empowerment, peace, clarity, connection, and you already have all of those tools within you and you are not using them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we must get back to using them.
When do you think that did we ever use them, or was there a shift, let's say culturally, when we got like connected to all this kind of chaotic feelings and behavior and being overwhelmed and not using what you're describing, the ability to manage this energy? Was there a shift in the culture?
I think that, cultural pressures certainly can weigh into it. We've got, of course, we're living in a modern, fast-paced world. We have a lot of influence coming in from external resources like technology, social media, AI. Our communities have shifted and changed. We used to have a much tighter access to community relationships and community growth. But if you think about these influences, I can't say that there is a definitive moment. A lot of people that I've worked with have described moments in their life where they do feel more connected to these innate abilities, and it tends to ebb and flow. And what I'm trying to do in my book, Common Sixth Sense, when writing it, is thinking about how can we incorporate these tools into our everyday life. So they are accessible always, which they are, not thinking so broadly, but just bringing it home, bringing back what we have that is accessible always, that isn't reserved for a Tuesday or a big event or a family gathering, that it's just every day when you're driving in your car and you get stressed, when you're trying to make a decision if you should surround yourself with somebody who you are starting to innately feel is unhealthy or toxic for you, in deciding what to order off of a menu. The more self-connected we are, the more aligned decision making.
And all of this process, as you're saying, is it's an internal process that we have control over, that we can manage, that we're too concerned with. I think you obviously you talk about this in the book. We're too heavily, and I mentioned that I think in the intro, we people rely too heavily on external validation, and it's all out there, right? We're so the connection crisis.
We have become alarmingly dependent on what I call external influencers. Think about the people in your life. Think about the environments you expose yourself to. And of course, technology. Big influencers. And we have given our power away to these external influencers to determine our quality of life. And that is not good. So we want to invite back, again, this is a conscious decision to invite back what we already came with and start connecting with those voices. Those voices are always going to lead you to the path of the greatest alignment in your life.
Well, I do one thing, which I don't think is a good thing. I'm asking you, but when I wake up in the morning, I go online and I get a synopsis of the news, what happened maybe in the middle of the night or the day before or in the morning. And then that starts all this stuff that you're talking about, getting too involved, too connected to all that outside, the outside world and its impact on me. And that's not a good thing. That's not something one should do, I'm assuming, when you wake up in the morning.
Well, I want to dissect that a little bit,
Okay, good.
Kathryn,
Yeah,
because it's the nature of the beast in the work that you do.
yeah.
You want to be a sponge for current events and those types of things. So I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with what you're doing, but what I would invite you to do is to can you give yourself 3 minutes before that? To just be with Kathryn, to just breathe, to feel your feet on the ground, the sun on your face, whatever it is that you connect with. The word I want to really drive home with listeners is resonate. Does it resonate with me in a healthy way? Right? So you're always just the nature of the beast, how you're wired, who you are. I would imagine you're going to want to go to those resources in the morning so that you can be on top of them. That is not a negative. That is not a positive. It just is. It's neutral. What I would love for you to do is take a few minutes for yourself every single morning to get back in your body. We know that feeling, okay? For anyone listening, you know that feeling when you're outside of yourself. It feels like you're there, but not. I describe it like hitting a gong and you sort of vibrate out of yourself. And if you do one simple thing, breathe, you will return to you. And that is what I would like to encourage you to do every single morning. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever resonates with you, is I'm giving this time, this moment to myself so that I can feel like I am in my body before I proceed. So here's a quick tool for all the listeners that I think will be helpful for you. When we think about the breath, this incredible innate ability that we came with, we take 20,000 breaths every single day. And I will venture to guess that if I ask you how many of those breaths you've been aware of today, um, it might be none, it might be
Yeah.
one, it might be two. But I would invite everyone to just take a breath and become aware of that breath and feel the return to your body and then proceed. Very simple. When in doubt, breathe and feel and experience the return back to you before you will proceed. Your experience will be so much different moving forward, and you will be able to weed out more naturally, more organically, things that do not align or work for you.
And it sounds so simple and obviously so easy to do. You've got to just get in the, as you're saying, the habit of doing it. And it's not all I like as you're describing it. I need the information, but how I process that information is what you're talking about. The information is the information, but I need to take a breath to or be aware of one, two, of what I'm how I'm breathing and then proceed. Is that it?
Absolutely. And then your experience with the information is different, right?
Yeah.
Because when we are in autopilot, hyperspeed, outside of ourselves, we are missing things. We are overlooking things. We are not in alignment. And, I like to keep things very real. No one is going to always be in alignment. These tools are about creating a more connected, authentic life for yourself. And we will not be successful sometimes when we try to do that. And that's okay. The goal is to incorporate it as a lifestyle, not something you try here or there. So, Kathryn, I can promise you that if you take a few minutes to yourself every single morning and you do it for 1 week, you will want to keep doing it and you will reap the benefits from doing so in the way that you navigate the rest of your day.
What about the people in your circle? Let's say your family, and they're not doing it. Now, is one in a position to say, to help them to do it? Or, people kind of back off, don't tell me what to do, or don't tell me to calm down, or don't tell me to relax. How do we kind of, or at least attempt to engage other people into this process?
So, this is something I call the lens of life. So, if we think about our lens of life, my lens is not your lens, and vice versa. And what we do as human beings is we try to painstakingly widen other people's lenses, right? Perhaps we are telling them how to live their life or giving them unsolicited advice. We're always in this like wrestling match battle of trying to make other people have wider lenses. But I will tell you, you will find so much peace in what I'm about to say.
I'm
You,
listening.
yes, you cannot widen someone else's lens, but you can inspire them with your own wide lens. So you think about living your life in more alignment, with deeper connection, with more clarity. And that can have a profound effect on the people that you share your life with. And it also gives us that much needed surrender to really grasp and understand it is not my life, it is their life. I can offer them healthy suggestions and those types of things, but you are never going to personally be able to change somebody else's lens. You can inspire them to change their own, but you cannot change theirs. And this, for a lot of people, is like, oh my gosh, I can put my sword down. Finally, I can put my sword down. I can focus on my lens, my quality of life, and I can hope and pray that their lens gets wider. But it's not my responsibility to make it wider.
That's a relief.
Huge relief.
A huge relief. Exactly. It's not my responsibility. That is well said. Now, what about you? How did you come to, I guess the question is, how did you get to this place? Um, I mean, at some point, I assume perhaps you were experiencing all the stuff and not accepting your sixth sense, and then something happened to you. Your eyes are opened, or what happened?
Well, I have always been a deeply spiritual person and very connected to my sixth sense for as long as I can possibly remember. And it has been in working with people over the past 25 years in understanding that there are common threads that people seek, and that is a path back to themselves. And that is why I wrote the book. But there were some key pivotal moments in my life that really helped me understand the common sixth sense skills, specifically the breath, on a much broader level. I was diagnosed about 10 years ago with a very rare vestibular condition called superior semicircular canal dehiscence. And basically, what that means is that most people have a nice thick bone layer that their brain sits on, and it separates that brain from the superior ear canal. Well, my bone was deteriorated, and so this created a third window. So I had so many vestibular systems. I was dizzy 40, 50 times a day. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I was awaiting my craniotomy surgery at UCLA Medical Center. And I had this overwhelming um, sense of peace that came from my breath. This is, by the way, before I had any medication. So I want to make that clear.
You weren't
It was,
drugged.
I was not drugged. I was
Yeah.
totally coherent. And it just was like the breath spoke to me. And I understood in that moment how underutilized this tool, this incredible tool in my life was. And it was a pretty defining moment. And about a year later, I was met with a home break-in, and I had a moment there as well where all of that intense fear just dissipated, and the breath spoke to me again. And I thought, if I can just breathe, I can get out of this. And it brought me this incredible sense of peace. So this is how the tools kind of started to get developed and evolved, was from what I had come to understand in working with people for so many years, but also with these personal, deeply personal experiences that shifted the trajectory of my life, and saying, wait a minute, it's like the answer's so obvious. We have all of this, but we don't use it.
But and Rachel, these were two major crises, obviously, and I don't know how far apart they were, but do we have to wait? No, if we read your book, we don't have to wait to have major crises, right? Like that, to be able to change and be able to follow the breathing and all the managing your energy. I mean,
Such a
yeah.
great question. And the answer is no, absolutely not. And that was what motivated me to write this book for people, is that these are tools every day for everyone. Um, Become aware now and live more aligned, more connected, with more clarity. I mean, the benefits are just countless. There are countless benefits to you connecting with yourself. But no, absolutely not. That's why I titled the book Common Sixth Sense. They're everyday tools. When we think about how you feel when someone doesn't have common sense. Think about how that affects your day. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, walks on the wrong side of the street, says something off-putting to you, and you say, my gosh, do they have no common sense? And that's what common sixth sense is about, is I want people to be able to navigate life more healthily. And if we commonly use what we already came with, that makes a lot more sense than not doing it.
Yeah. And the impact on your body has to be incredibly positive. I mean, if you are, I'm thinking calmness that as you're speaking instead of this chaos, and the having to do with every part of your body on an everyday basis, because whether it's heart, lungs, chronic illness, all of those things it helps to dissipate all of that if you follow what we've been taught, what you've been talking about.
Absolutely. And think about the voices within you as a beautiful orchestra communicating together. So we have, the brain, the ego voice, we have our beautiful heart voice. The gut voice is your intuitive pathway, your guiding light. And we have the voice of all the rest of our body that is constantly talking to us, communicating with us. The messages are clear. Sometimes they can get convoluted, like our brain ego. A lot of the messages we hear from that voice we can dismiss. The heart can be confusing For example, I will just loan them the money one more time, or I love them so much, even though they don't treat me well. So, those voices can send mixed messages. Your body's a pretty solid alarm clock. It'll let you know what's working, what's not working. So when you think about being calm, being a calm energy within yourself, yes, that has infinite benefits to your body, your mind, your spirit. But remember, your gut voice, your most underutilized voice, is what you want to re-access so that you can start listening, because it's talking. It is talking. It knows you better than anybody, and it will never guide you down the wrong path. So when we think about re-embracing ourselves in this deeper, more connected way, it is not something new, Kathryn. It's a reunion. You already know. You've already been here before.
Good advice. I mean, more than good advice. I mean, there's so much in the book. Obviously, we've covered some of it, but not the whole, all of it. So I'm recommending Common Sixth Sense, Unleash Your Most Authentic Connected Life. And I've been talking to the author, Rachael Schmidt. We only have a couple minutes left. So, Rachael, give us website platforms to other platforms to go to for more information about the book and about you and about your work.
Yes, so if you would like to explore the path back to yourself, you can check me out at common6.com. That's SIXTH.com. You can find my book on Amazon or online where most books are sold.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
really
Kathryn.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. Joining me today is Patricia Martin, author of Will the Future Like You? Reflections on the Age of Hyper Reinvention. Will the future like you? Patricia Martin, host of the Young in the World podcast, explores the challenges that tech and the internet impose on the human psyche and offers a revelatory adventure through the processes that make us who we are. She argues that 24/7 online connectivity reshapes not only our sense of self, but erodes our very ability to form our identities. We form identity in three ways, she says: how we see ourselves, how others see us, and our will to shape ourselves. But with the internet, that world has been blown completely open, its boundaries obliterated. The once contained arenas where our identities formed, the neighborhood, school, or workplace, have been radically expanded to the entirety of the digital realm, including the dark web and mainstream platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Patricia Martin's work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Huffington Post, the New York Times, Slate, and Psych Magazine. Welcome to the show, Patricia. Nice to have you on.
Thank you. It's good to be with you this morning, Kathryn.
Great to be with you. Actually, this is kind of scary stuff because it really, it just, for me, it really hit home. I mean, so let's get to like what this whole issue about how our sense of self is being eroded by our connection in the digital age.
So I have been studying this intensely for 10 years and using a multiplicity of different methodologies to track this phenomenon. And what I discovered is that the internet, most especially the social media platforms, have built-in capacity to fragment our sense of self. And that first element of what helps us know who we are, um, how others see us, rather, how we see ourselves. And then the second, how others see us, has been flipped. And so how we're deriving our sense of self is really from the crowd. And if the 20th century's cultural themes were the search for self, 21st century cultural themes, as I've tracked them, are about how do I perform a self, which is very different than living as a self. And so what this is creating for people is a sense of calling from a part of them that is probably the weakest part of the psyche. As Carl Jung defined it, we're operating now from a thing he called persona. And it's a thin shell of the self. It is our social self. It's kind of our social operating system. And it was never meant for this heavy duty 24/7 exercise of creating different profiles, creating and speaking from different voices, and
Okay, I'm going to
spreading
stop you.
that.
So you're talking about, so we're connected to LinkedIn, we're connected to Instagram, we're to get all these different platforms, and so we keep defining ourselves in different ways on these different platforms. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. And so we're living, rather than living from the inside out, we're living from the outside in. It's an inversion of the self. And what it's doing is it's creating a lot of fractures in how we know who we are.
Okay, so give us an example of that, let's say, because most of us are, as you say, we're connected to all of those things, some of us more than others, and it's defining ourselves. We're not defining ourselves, well, we're defining ourselves in all these different platforms, I guess. So what does that do? How does it work? What is that doing to us in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, what that's spinning up for us is, it's creating fissures in the self. And I identified, I tracked these different symptoms that people were talking about. And here's the first and most pernicious. It's called, I call it persona fog. And this is where we have lived so much from the persona, and it has fragmented our sense of who we are. And what descends is a kind of psychic fog about any kind of inner guidance, any sense of how to move forward. And you see these symptoms, I mean, they've become widespread memes, symptoms that get talked about in terms of stuckness, right? So the question isn't anymore, gee, I'm at a turning point. what do I do? The question has become, I'm at a turning point. Who am I? It's a very different question.
Yeah, that is a very different question. Is the extreme of that, for instance, like when you have kids online and bullying, for instance, and the reflection of who they are is based on what the bulliers online are saying to them. Is that it?
That's part of it. That's one of the cultural tells that our sense of self is breaking down, not just personally and individually, but culturally. Because this is a wide, wide world. This is a big territory that people live in now. Our understanding of community and how we derive our sense of self from community, that has all flattened. So if you're fractured, you're vulnerable. If you're vulnerable, you're doubting yourself. And for someone who is, a teen, for instance, and this has been studied widely now, for teens, it's especially crucial because that is the age of life where identity is forming most. And so, I mean, I can give you an example from a recent interview. And this isn't a teen example, Kathryn. This is a young woman in her 30s. She created a persona online, and anybody who's interested in this story, you can go over to Young in the World and download it. She created a persona online that she couldn't shake. Everywhere she went, people referred to her as that persona. And over time, she began to speak so clearly with that voice because she had crowd tested it. And she knew what words to use, what phrases to strike, and what tone of voice to use. That the more she did it, the more it became who she was. 7 years, it was an experiment. 7 years into that experiment, two things happened. One, she built an audience of 3.5 million. The other thing that happened, she had a total psychic collapse, was hospitalized, and attempted to end her life. Those are pretty serious stakes.
They're very serious stakes, and that's really scary stuff because what you're saying is this is happening maybe not on that same level, but that's kind of what's happening to all of us on a daily basis. Because is that what you're saying?
Yes, when you consider that 91% of the American public from ages 18 onward, 91% of the American public have adopted smartphones. So this is a pretty universal problem
Yeah.
considering that that is our central screen.
What does it say? You talk about, and I'm kind of switching topics here. You talk about the MAGA movement and how that came about and how that's kind of tied into what we've been talking about.
Well, I dove into this recently to really kind of understand the role of an authoritarian leader in a specific cultural moment and why they resonate as powerfully as they do. And there had been a lot of work written about, the authoritarian is giving the audience an identity they didn't have. It's filling an identity void. And there was a lot written about that in terms of the Nazis. It's very interesting. Carl Jung, actually, although he has a kind of checkered relationship to the Nazi era, in other words, his work was adopted and manipulated by the Nazis. And by the way, Kathryn, I'm not using the word Nazi to be provocative or like this is a serious business. But but it is an interesting example of how authoritarianism takes hold of a public and it's almost unshakable. And Jung's theory is was that it was that identity was kind of that baked into German culture was this belief in the archetype of Odin, for instance, Wotan in some circles, where this was a war god who was cruel, excuse me, cruel and wise. at the same time. And the wisdom nullified the cruelty. And so, what the theory Carl Jung had was that after World War I, the German public was unconsciously yearning to hear those words and see those symbols and be reminded of who they were. And an authoritarian stepped in and resonated. And so if we compare the MAGA movement to that, being careful not to overstep, what we're seeing is there was an ideal about how people saw themselves as Americans, predominantly white, predominantly Christian, and predominantly male dominated. And as time moved on, people, there was more immigration, women started to have careers and rise economically, in many cases outpacing men. And there was a yearning to return to an identity that was very deeply embedded. And what Carl Jung calls out, is the problem is when you return to that identity, that archetypal identity, if you don't also look at the shadow side of that identity, you are doomed to become the puppet, the slave of the authoritarian. And I think that has a lot to say with what we're seeing now.
So that describes our vulnerability to that kind,
Yes.
yeah, to that kind of a
Yes.
movement.
Yes. And so as Americans, like some of the best work that, we can do is really kind of face ourselves and say, okay, if things were going wrong and we want to set them right, we want to get on a better path, what is it in us that we haven't asked ourselves, that we haven't looked at, that we're afraid to look at? Shadow material is always scary because the ego wants to keep us safe and it does not want us to look there. And I don't think it takes a genius to see that we're in a very ego-dominated administration right now.
Narcissistic.
You know what? There are psychiatrists and psychologists who say this administration, especially the chief executive, checks every box of that dark triad. So, make of that as you will. I'm not in a position because I'm a cultural analyst, not a psychoanalyst, meaning I treat the culture like it's a patient. And I would say, I can't really diagnose somebody from afar. I'm not really qualified to do that work. But I will say I have listened to my colleagues at the C.G. Jung Institute. I've interviewed scores of psychologists and psychiatrists, and they concur that the boxes are all checked for that diagnosis, only looking at it from afar.
All right, we're looking at it from afar. We can't change that we can't change that individual, but we can change ourselves, is what you're saying. That
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
So,
we can't change ourselves. And I also think, I just want to interject this, Kathryn, because I had this dawn on me recently that one of the things that is, I think, really confusing and creating a lot of dissonance in the culture right now is that this almost cult-like appreciation for the leadership, that movement is trying to insist that those values, that perspective on the world is mainstream. And, the other 5/8 of the country's populations are saying, this is completely antithetical to who I am. So I think that this is going to stir up more, not less, dissonance in the culture until it finally gets resolved.
so there are cracks, you're saying,
Oh,
or
yes.
fissures, and and they're there, and they're going to widen, obviously, depending on we, the people, too. We have to, and I want to get back to it, I guess, this whole idea of taking a look at ourselves, our own shadows, reflecting on who we really are, and not succumbing to all of this definition of ourselves from all these other sources. How do we do that on a daily basis?
Well, I believe that this is really a call toward more conscious use of our digital tools. Um, we keep using the word authentic, and we think that that means something simple, but it's really hard work to integrate the various pieces of who you are once, especially it's been fragmented. But what people are experiencing isn't a failure to be authentic. What they're experiencing is persona fog. They're feeling fragmented. And so what can they do? Understand, be aware that the more self-doubt you feel, the more you might be succumbing to too much time online. The more you're searching for TikTok videos to answer your questions about yourself, the more you keep asking Claude Anthropic or ChatGPT to describe you or to solve your emotional conflicts, those are all signals that you're oversaturated in this. And I advise people to do really simple things like when you go online, write down on a pad, piece of paper, get tactile and write down why you're there and glance at it from time to time. And you know what? I've done this and it's amazing,
Yeah.
15, 20 minutes in and I'm like, oh my God, this
What
is
am I
not why
doing?
I
Yeah.
came. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a simple consciousness tool.
Yeah, because you get sucked in, you really do. And I get sucked into Chat GPT. And just like you say, like, okay, what am I? I've been doing this now for a half an hour. What am I doing and why am I doing it? Stop, right? Write it down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about, I mean, let's get back to maybe young people, because I don't know how many, I interview a lot of people. I read that, the kids are on screens, on the average of 5 hours a day. And maybe that's that maybe that's less than what they really are. What do you do about that?
Well, I can tell you what's already happening. I mean, I think that territory has been covered really well by people like Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge. I, and I've studied their work intensely, but I think also that the thing to understand is there are now influencers who are rising, who are telling young people, they're young people telling young people uh, where to better invest their time. They're starting to talk about sort of the social and cultural rigors of being an adult. So sending a handwritten thank you note. Successful people do these things. Successful
When is the
people.
last time you've gotten I'm going to ask you. It's an interesting comment because that you got a handwritten thank you note. I never
Oh,
get one.
I know.
I
And
never.
the reason I can answer that is
Okay.
because I use it as a bookmark.
Oh.
And
Okay.
so to do the podcast Jung in the World,
Yeah.
I'm gonna open kimono and say, we operate on a shoestring despite the fact that we've built an audience of 2 million. And what I have to do in order to make that succeed is I get these interns, these summer interns from the University of Chicago, and they're brilliant.
Yeah.
And they have a sense of inner competence that I just so admire. And there was one 2 years ago who, I take the kids out to lunch. I got a handwritten thank you. Then at the end of her uh, internship with us, she sent me a thank you for the experience. This young woman is now she's a scientist and she's in Cambridge, England, and she's headed straight north.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great that these young influencers are rising to tell peer-to-peer learning is much more powerful than parents saying put down your phone.
Yeah.
and they're rising and pointing out things. They're also doing things like reading philosophy and poetry again. And, they're studying the Stoics. And why do they study the Stoics? Because they're feeling this sense of uncertainty and helplessness, which was what the Stoic movement was all about. It was during that period in Roman history, when corruption was at an all-time high and people felt helpless to do anything about it. And the war machine was kind of grinding down, and there was no real sense of the future. And so people began to look within and rebuild themselves. And isn't it interesting? This young generation who is feeling fragmented and fogged and stuck is starting to reach for solutions by going back to the archetypes of the ancient wisdom. I just think it's fascinating.
So we are starting, you're saying, starting to turn the corner. What is this, Gen Z?
It's Gen Z, and there's some debate about what we're going to call the next gen. Some people call it Gen Alpha, because it it is believed by some social researchers that it will be the generation that marks the new beginning.
Although it
The
does
new
sound like the alpha male to me, but
Oh, it does to me too. I'm using it reluctantly,
yeah.
but it'll eventually shake out.
Well, then there's hope. I mean, and you're right in the midst of it, I guess, as you're saying, you're working with these University of Chicago students. So we are starting, I say it again, to turn the corner. Do you think this is kind of happening all over here? Because it's a worldwide issue, right? Or global, right?
Oh
Not just
yes.
in the United States, it's everywhere. Is that happening?
This is what gives me hope, Kathryn. First of all, as a researcher, I was kind of a lone wolf for 2 decades, right? So
Yeah.
I started following the internet back in and worked with. I did a project with Vinton Cerf, who was the father of the internet, widely believed to be so. I did a project for Al Gore's office when he was vice president. So I was kind of there at the
The
dawning.
beginning, yeah.
Yeah. And so I've tracked this since then. And what was frustrating to me as a researcher is that there wasn't a lot of secondary research. There weren't a lot of academics or scientists jumping into it, probably because it was emergent, but the other reason was that it was moving so fast that to devote a year or two of your life and your research capacity to something that you would publish 2.5, 3 years later to be irrelevant didn't make sense. But now we've got 3 decades and 5 generations to study. And I think more and more cutting edge research is being done, and we're starting to understand just what the internet is doing to us. And I think that's a bright star. That gives us reason to hope. We're going
So
to
you're
know
saying we
more.
have a history. There's a history now
Yes,
that we
there's
can
a
take a
history.
look at.
There are
Yeah.
patterns you can see. And there are things you can track with some confidence, in the same way that I did for Will the Future Like You? So when we know more, and we know better, we can do better, as Toni Morrison said.
But Patricia, what about the fact that, and I'm using this, I don't know, maybe it was Thomas Friedman, I can't remember, but like every 6 months things are evolving so quickly, whether it is with AI, for instance. So how even can you predict? I mean, like you're talking about, we do have a history now, we can take a look at what's happening, but because things are going even so much more quickly, what does that say? Where does that put us?
Well, okay. So let me give you a timeline about that, and so that I can be more specific about how quickly AI is moving. Uh, so, first of all, to do this research, in 2016, had a custom built AI utility, um, to actually be able to scrape the web and look at 500,000 posts and do pattern recognition across those posts. And I can tell you, it was so rudimentary. It was like I was working with legacy code. That's how difficult and clunky it
Hmm.
was. And now I use Claude, Anthropic, and it's interesting. I actually put this to Claude. First of all, what you need to know is if you're going to use AI personally, you need to give it a lot of information about yourself, which is a trade-off, right? Because you're really revealing yourself to the robot. But you know, the more quality information you put in, the better information you get out. And I asked him, I call him,
Yeah.
I did ask him about his gender, and he said that when he was designed to have a male identity because it would have more authority. He was also designed to be honest. And I asked him why honesty, and he said, because honesty builds trust. So he's this tool is very clear that it's a robot. And so I asked him, are we with AI in the same place we were in at the dawn of the internet when we thought it would democratize the media and the society? And Kathryn, you probably remember the euphoria around what the internet was going to do for us. And then, of course, it got very commercialized. And you know, it almost got weaponized against people on some level psychologically because there are things operating behind the screen that you don't realize are happening. But I asked him, are we in, you know, your early days or are you an adolescent? And he said, I'm an adolescent
Oh,
and I'm a late adolescent, which means we have about two, maybe even just 1 year when AI will be like those heady, optimistic days of the internet, and then it will become heavily commercialized because people will want to make money from it.
okay. And we have to stop on that note because we have a minute left.
Oh
Very
my goodness.
interesting. I know. Yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation. I want to mention the book again. Will the Future Like You? Reflections on the Age of Hyper Reinvention. And I've been talking to the author, Patricia Martin. Patricia, just give us a website or platforms so people can continue with the conversation.
Sure. Of course, my author website is patricia-martin.com. You can Google me, Patricia Martin. I have enough content where I'll probably rise to the top. I also invite people to come on over to Jung in the World, Jung in the World. And if you want to listen to some of those interviews, that's great. But if you want some of the edgier stuff, we have a B-side, and that's where the interview took place with the woman who lived completely in her persona for 7 years and what it did to her. That's a really telling listen.
Great, fascinating stuff. It was really, I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you. I feel
Yeah,
the same way,
I
Kathryn.
learned a lot. Great conversation. We'll have to you have to be on the show again. Thank
I'd
you.
love to.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.